Welcome everybody to Mo and Raj and Rosenbaum Are Humans. Marianne is not with us for this session yet. Maybe she'll drop by. I am here with Delia Sherman and Ellen Kushner again, but now together. We've done individual interviews with them, and now we're going to have a chat, all three of us. And you were just telling about Zoom Shakespeare, which sounded amazing, except the bad folio.
Well, it's the bad folio of Hamlet.
Because the bad folio of Hamlet.
Yes.
So here's the deal. Right after pandemic started. Bad Quarto. Sorry, Quarto.
The Bad Quarto.
Yeah, that immediately makes it better, right? So right after pandemic started, I was missing reading plays in my living room with my friends. And I said something about this on Facebook, and this English actress that I just adore, Emily Carding, who's a friend who also designs tarot decks and does all this other stuff. She's done a one-woman show of Richard III with herself as Richard, and she turns the audience into all the other characters. It's really great.
Huh.
And and then some of you die. This is our souvenir from this.
It's such a high body count. As soon as somebody died, slap this on you.
Yes, for those of you who
hands out stickers.
Julia's holding up a sticker that says dead. Because once you're a character who's died, you're in the audience. It's in the round. Anyway, so Emily said, nice. "Oh, I would love to do a Shakespeare with you, Ellen. Why don't we do A Winter's Tale? Because I just need to rant and rave right now because I'm an actress, locked in the apartment. And so I want to be the ranting, raving king, and you can be Paulina, which is like the cool part in the play. And I just about fainted. It's like this amazing person wants to read with moi. So I said, all right, I'll just pull together a few friends and we'll do this on Zoom. And it was fabulous. And so the group kind of grew and shifted and eventually decided that we were meeting every Saturday afternoon, which is like 8 o'clock for Emily and Kelly in London, and unfortunately is a little early for Michael in California, but it all works out. And we went through the whole canon. We did the whole canon.
Wow.
That's
amazing.
Because we didn't do every now and then we would skip, a week or two. But then we all still, the people who couldn't come.
It's like the Shakespeare parasha for the week. That's the, it's like the Torah portion, the Shakespeare portion for the week.
Yeah. Right. and the week where we couldn't like meet and read Shakespeare as a group, some of us just couldn't stand it. And so we did The Importance of Being Earnest on the side.
There you go.
On Shakespeare. So we did the whole canon in a year, and then we were all sitting around going, well, now what? And we had various ideas, but what it's turned into is everybody who had a really cool idea gets to do it now. So Michael Hovance in California, who has in fact played Hamlet and many other cool Shakespearean roles, kept going on about the Bad Quarto.
And so he set us and so we're doing the Bad Quarto.
Well, let's explain what the Bad Quarto is.
Yeah.
So the Bad Quarto of Hamlet is, I'm making this up, but it's something along the lines of like a bunch of actors who got fired did an unauthorized printing of the script to Hamlet that just had the bits they could remember in it.
And they couldn't remember all of the names properly, so I can't remember exactly.
Polonius is Carambus.
Yes.
But that makes you think, wait a minute, is that just like they took it from another play, or the original Hamlet, in fact, did have him called Carambus? Who the hell knows?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Wikipedia probably knows. So look up Bad Quarto. But
yeah.
And
it's
so
a great name too.
The deal is that whoever picks the play has to cast it. And that means they always can have the lead if they want it, but it also means that they have to go through every freaking scene trying to figure out, who's going to play who and make sure that people don't end up talking to each other. And so he said, well, tell me who you want to play, but bear in mind that they may be completely different in this play or even have a different name. So
yeah. So who did you want to play?
Well, I can't decide. I haven't read the whole. Initially, I kind of like just put me somewhere, and I can't wait to see what happens. I sort of don't want to read it in advance and just experience it for the first time.
Sure. Yeah.
But that does mean that I won't. That
totally.
If I pick a part that I won't, I might be sorry later.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
Hey, I guess Michael, he's good caster.
It's a little bit of a trade-off if you want to optimize for your experience as performer or your experience as audience, in a way.
Exactly. Well put. Because like initially,
I'm always I am always the messenger. I am now all the messengers. I have I move it around on my head depending on how many messengers are in the scene.
Nice,
in the play.
nice.
And one time she put a bicycle helmet on her head because that messenger was in a real hurry.
There you go. It's a bicycle messenger. It's a modern staging.
Yes, exactly.
But like there, people used to be very fussed about are people, who are only in a couple of acts, but they should be in every act so that they don't feel sad and bored. And, so you would give people really small parts throughout the whole play so that they got to be in every scene. And I realized some people really want that, but I am so into just listening and watching that I finally had to say, well, my policy is give me one really good part or, two reasonably good parts, but I don't want to be in every scene because I was always in my lines because I was so enchanted watching everybody. I'm like, you don't want to Ellen missing her lines. Just don't give me small parts because I will only forget that I'm in them.
It's I mean, that's sort of one of the, to be filed under sort of upsides of the pandemic. There's all kinds of, there's more downsides than upsides, of course. Yeah. But like, there's, it's crises bring on new invention. And so there's like this kind of thing, and also all those, the spate of TikTok musicals.
Yeah.
Did you see the, the crying in the grocery store? Have you seen that one?
No.
You got to check that out there. I think it started them. Then later there was like a Ratatouille one and whatever, but I
saw the Ratatouille one.
Yeah.
The Ratatouille one eventually ended up, that's probably what you saw. It ended up being a real benefit, like done by Broadway people, like for the Actors Fund. But they started with this. I think the crying in the grocery store was one of the first ones where there's some pop song or folk song where somebody's crying in a grocery store, and somebody was like, I'm going to do a musical theater take on it in TikTok as if this was a part of a musical, like do it, with all this sort of musical theater cliches, in terms of the song structure and so on. And then because TikTok has this duet function where you can take an existing track that somebody else is singing and then sing alongside it, which is very clever because in the pandemic, it's really hard to sing together over Zoom or do anything like that. But with the TikTok thing, it's like you're laying down tracks. It's like, so you can sing, you can listen to them first and then you can come in at the right time when they come in. So they added, so somebody else then posted one taking his original video and duetting it and having it be the guy is like saying, it's a fight between a couple in a grocery store. So then a woman played his wife, who's, he's breaking up with or whatever in the grocery store. And then somebody came in to play the child. And it sort of does this Mondrian thing where they're getting smaller and smaller boxes. And then they add all these, like the checkout clerk. And like, suddenly there's a cast of thousands singing this piece of the grocery store. You got to go check it out. I'll send a link. But that spawned like a whole host of and the Wellerman thing, the sea shanty craze, like this whole bunch of sort of new art that's created out of the context of everybody being separated and having to contribute asynchronously and it's sort of emergently. Like none of these people know that they're collaborating with each other. Each person is just throwing another layer onto it. And that feels very
dance videos that were very like that, where they had a bunch of different people dancing in their apartments or doing things, and it worked really well because they could edit it and they could make it flow. So had a Spanish dancer segueing into something like an African dance or something like that. It was really.
Well, dragging this back to literature, because I feel guilty otherwise. A couple of really good things came out of the Shakespeare thing for me, which is why I felt it was legit to talk about it, which was that I got the language back in my head.
Yeah.
I mean, not only back in my head, but back in my body.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that had been such an important part of me as a writer when I was starting out. And making my name was that I had, read all Shakespeare and I would reread him for fun. We don't do that anymore because I want to talk to my friends on Facebook. But Delia, did you feel the same way?
Well, it was, since the book I'm working on is set in the 19th century, that something of the use of metaphor. I've been also reading a lot of Dickens and Trollope and so on and so forth. But the kind of gravity of the language and the fact that the language is part of the point as opposed to simply the vehicle.
Yeah.
Marianne.
Wait, finish your sentence.
Well, reading that stuff aloud really allows you to become more on board with something where how you say it is as important as what you're saying, which is not something that is very modern, but it is something that is very much a part of what I like about writing, is that for me, really good writing is not something that is just beautiful, but that is, it doesn't have to be, I don't like just pretty language. It has to integrate with what's being said. And Shakespeare did that better than anyone, really.
And there's a way when go ahead.
But also, just, you were mentioning Dickens, novels were originally read out loud, mostly. And so reintegrating, and I think both Delia and I have always written, very prose that is a lot about the sound of the prose.
Yeah.
Because that's the kind of writers we are. So reading the Shakespeare completely, we don't read Dickens to each other, I will admit it, but we could. but I think that it kind of reignited or reconnected us with that, or at least, made it like a bigger thing and stuff. I personally, what were you going to say, Ben, about that?
Well, I mean, the reconnecting to the source thing is really crucial, but I was going to say also connecting to what Delia said, that like, I think when writing is taught, there is often this it's, as a tool for teaching it, you break it down into subcomponents. Say, well, now let's talk about voice, and now let's talk about style, and let's talk about plot, and let's talk about, but, all of that is kind of an abstraction. Like, there's a level at which, if you look very closely, the distinction between style and content and plot and character collapse. You can't, right? Like, in a way, it's like there is no, there is, like all plot is the action of character, and all plot is happening through the expression of style, and style is always, so there's almost, and that, and also that there's a virtue, sort of, I think what you were saying about, like, it's not just about pretty, it's not just about style being sort of ornament, but about it being load bearing, about it being, that is where the character happens, or where the they're inseparable. If it's done right, they're sort of inseparably interconnected.
Because it's really true, and I see it especially in dialogue, and reading plays really makes this dramatic. Even though Shakespeare is he writes in different registers, and the idea of some people speak formally, some people speak staccato, some people have little tics. This is what dialogue is the way people express themselves, and they're not just getting to the next plot point with it. They're not just conveying information. They are conveying information. And that is really central to characterization. And you notice that very strongly when you read somebody like Shakespeare, who was really steeped in the theory of how one used language was something that said something about your soul, rather than this is how everybody else is talking, so I'm going to do that too.
Right.
Well, Shakespeare had that extra dimension of poetry, that he could send people into blank verse.
Yeah.
And that also tells you something about the character. I also want to say, this is the perfect place to talk about this. I have developed the theory of Shakespeare as a novelist. Like, there were not novels in those days. Yeah. But when you read the plays, it's the heart of a novelist, in that character is as important as anything else. And there's this subtlety that he's just written in. And I keep saying to all my colleagues, is there any other playwright around that time who created characters at his level of subtlety? And we can't find any. I'm a huge fan of the Jacobean revenge tragedy people. And sometimes there'll be like two really fully fleshed out characters in a Jacobean revenge tragedy. but really they're sensationalist movies. They're like, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened movies. They may have a character or two, whereas I think Shakespeare really was writing novelistically. People have internal thoughts. They don't behave well. That I'm wandering into Ellen doesn't know what the fuck she's talking about there, but if I think about this harder, I might be able to write an essay about it, but I just as soon not.
I need to put in a word for John Webster. I think that he was a little bit more grungy about it, but there is a basis of real people in most of his characters, and I find him a little. He's not as warm as Shakespeare is. He doesn't have as passion for his characters as Shakespeare does. But he's like a horror writer.
A really good horror writer.
Yeah, he's like a really good horror writer. He really gets you invested in these people, but you can't quite identify with them because what he gives them to do is a little bit too grand.
I have to jump in, and I'm going to say I'm sorry for being late, but I want to talk about Pamela Dean's Tam Lin, because she embeds a Jacobean revenge tragedy into a college novel and uses it, and this is, I'm sorry, a bit of a spoiler to highlight the
I'll take my headphones off.
Highlight the differences between the humans and the Fae. And the Fae are strange and motivated by things we don't understand, and she puts them in the heart of very real human characters, and so it's almost as if she's playing with those two genre types and exactly the kinds of things you're both talking about. So
I edited that book.
Did you really, Delia? Oh my God, I love that book so much.
Terry could not edit it. She handed it off to me, and I edited that book.
Oh my God!
You edited Pamela Dean's Tam Lin? God, no wonder I married you. Holy shit.
It's an incredible book. I love it so much. I mean, I love all of her writing, but that one is just perfect from line one to final line. It's just a great novel. So,
which is why it's a big cult novel, because it's.
Oh, is it really?
Oh, are you kidding?
Oh,
yeah.
There's practically like a secret handshake. It's it's a little bit out of fashion now, but there was a time when you could tell a Tam Lin reader.
Wow.
Well, I'm planning to hand it off to my daughter when she goes to college. I think it should go in like every girl's little like off to college you go. Have a copy of Tam Lin.
College survival kit.
But it's not going to happen.
Stay away from those people in the classics department.
That's right.
But the theater people are great. So just to conclude the point I to make, which is that people love to go, well, what if Mozart were alive today? What if Shakespeare were alive today? I think Shakespeare would be a novelist. I think that's where his heart is.
Yeah. It's a good point. That certainly is. That I think is the thing that made it so. That combination of what you were saying about I liked what you're saying about warmth. Like, it's not just that Shakespeare writes such rich characters, it's that it does seem like he gleefully inhabits all these rich characters. Like, he can't, like, even the most villainous of villains, he can't help but sort of, he's just exploding with boundless sympathy for, you know what I mean? Like, and gleefully having them do the worst and most ruthless and most horrible things, but just like sort of completely identifying with everyone as he's writing them. And I feel like that's always like an aspirational element of Shakespeare, you know, as a writer, that you're kind of like, you would love to have this sort of universality, this breadth of being of you know, loving all your characters in that way. And then the thing about style, that partly that's expressed through this heightened, you know, or these different registers, and the characters are so distinctive from one another. When you were talking about the style thing, I was going to say something that I went and listened to. We had a guest on our podcast a couple of episodes ago, or an episode ago, Sugi, who's on a podcast, Fiction Nonfiction. And I went after the episode, I went to listen to that podcast, which is great. And
who is this?
Somebody.
Her name is She writes under V.V. Ganeshanandan. She's one of the other Sri Lankan American writers.
Okay,
her name's Segi. She wrote this novel, Love Marriage, which is a great novel about a love marriage, arranged marriage thing against the backdrop of the Sri Lankan Civil War. But she runs a great podcast, fiction, nonfiction.
Okay.
So
sorry. Go on, Ben.
This story has very, very little to do all of that, except that there was a guest on the podcast who was saying they were talking about workshop culture and how things, well, which might be worth talking about, but it was sort of like, it was kind of interesting because it was sort of like, there's been a movement in the past year, I think, about sort of reevaluating a bunch of stuff about workshop culture and so on. And some of it, I think, salutary, but I have lots of thoughts, but that's maybe another topic. But anyway, they were giving an example of how you might have different linguistics or cultural traditions, and you might have one where you used, we have the convention that like you should use said and asked as the speech tags because nobody notices them. They're like invisible essentially. And if you use other ones, it calls attention to them, and somebody else might have some different thing. And then somebody who was some professor all broke in to say, well, I hope you're not trying to get students not to use speech tags, because it's such an uphill battle to get the students to put it in the speech tags. And I was listening to that. This has nothing to do with the main content of what they were talking about, but I was particularly caught by that because I was like, that's funny, because I feel like, not that I don't like speech tags, and it's fine to put in said and asked, it's important for clarity, but it sort of feels like if you read like Austen, very often she doesn't have speech tags because it's clear only this character could possibly say this line. In a room full of four people talking to each other, you're never in any doubt about which person is saying which thing, because every word, and that's where I'm saying about, to bring it back to style and character being, that on some level there's no, the distinction between them breaks down because every single word is expressive of that character in such a way that, partly it's because they're often types. I mean, it's partly because they're heightened characters where, and often because it's satirical and comedic, the characters that she's making fun of, or whatever, but also, even the characters that are more realistically drawn, like it's just so them. Everything is just so them. And that's a pleasure of the text. Yeah.
So to tie this back in, I am a dramatist manqué. If Shakespeare's a novelist manqué, I'm a dramatist manqué. And I am all about the speech tags and am always putting in my tags like Edward Eager at the point where I want the pauses to be in dialogue. And I will often I don't think it's over explaining, but I will often give you essentially very clear directions on how this should be read. I really want you to know how I hear the line in my head. And I will do everything from put my commas where I want the pauses to be to explain maybe what the person's doing physically, which is an actor's trick, or give some sense of what it sounds like to hear them say this line, because I want you to hear it and see it.
Well, that's often something that's, I don't know, well, go ahead.
Can I say that Terry Pratchett does the same thing?
Yeah.
I mean, no, as you. I mean, he really does. He punctuates with. I call them inquits because I'm old fashioned. Okay, it's a speech tag. And he punctuates with those, and he constantly is putting these things. He's also putting pauses in while he's describing how someone is speaking, how they're standing, what they're doing. Comfortable or uncomfortable. And it really makes, I think it really brings you into, it's like you're there, and you're there are so many people who write, and this is simply a matter of taste and a matter of the kind of thing that they're doing, is that they're writing in a black box, and the people are talking to each other, or they're acting, and whatever they're acting upon appears, but you don't really, you get the impression that there's not a lot around them, whereas Pratchett always makes sure that you know exactly where everyone is and what it looks like and what it smells like and what it feels like. And it just really pulls you in a way.
But it's interesting what you say about speech tags, because I think you're right that it hadn't occurred to me, but in a sense they are the most blank thing you could interrupt dialogue with. Like that's a pure pause. He said, as opposed to, leaning on the door, he leaned on the doorway, or as opposed to, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
like all those other, and I think partly when it was funny to hear this person say, I got to get my students put in speech tags, because I often feel like I am, if I'm editing, you know, somebody, if I'm critiquing something or editing my kid's story or something, that I'm saying, you don't need these speech tags if you have precisely that. Like if what you are doing is interleaving the dialogue with description, you can sort of rely on the convention that if you describe an action or a memory or a sensation of that character, and then in the same paragraph proceed with dialogue, we know that's the person. We've reset that the subject of the previous verb is the speaker by default. So unless you, right?
I want to jump in just to say, I think I can parse a little bit of what's happening here in that it is a skill question, right? So when I get entry-level students, they are writing stories for the first time, and when they write dialogue, you cannot, the dialogue is not differentiated often. It is pretty generic. And so the reader gets very lost very quickly without speech tags. And so in a lot of beginner classes, I'm exactly like that professor where, and the classmates are like that too. You have to give us some signposts so that we can follow what's going on. What you guys are talking about is more of an advanced skill. And I have to tell you, listening to this, you are filling me with anxiety for this book that I've almost finished, because I'm like, oh God, I got to go back and make sure all my dialogue is really differentiated. And you can tell at every moment who is speaking without the speech tags. I mean, that's the goal. That would be the ideal, right? And I'm like, I don't think I do enough of that.
I mean, it's an ideal. It's an ideal. It's not every book should be like that, right?
I mean, they should. Yes, you must.
No, they should.
So, well, no, I mean, everyone speaks differently. I mean, okay, if you're trying to represent life and humanity, anyway, but you could have some weird experimental goal, but I think most of us are trying to represent people, and how people.
But I think that if you actually were to listen to an average, if you were just sit at a bus stop and record people with a transcript, that there would be some differentiation, but not the degree. I think what Austen and Shakespeare are doing is an extremely heightened form in which it's like the pure distillation of character. And I find that thrilling, and I love it, and it's my jam. But I actually don't want to live in a world in which that's every author's aspiration, because I don't think that's the only way to.
I'm not aiming to write like Shakespeare, but I do think, like, I'm often trying to write, similar to what Alice Munro does, right? And she doesn't do the heightened differentiation, but the differentiation is still there. It's just quieter, right? And so anyway, it's good. It is a good task for me when I finish this to go through and look at the dialogue closely. And it's a good exercise for students. Often I will have my fiction students, write a scene as if in a play, right? To get them to focus on the dialogue for a little while, right? I also make them write poetry to get them to focus on the sound of the language, because they often get so caught up in story and plot that they forget to pay attention, right? And then they can, so they go do a little bit of that, and then they come back, and hopefully it infuses their fiction writing. So I don't know.
That's really fun.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't work for everyone, but some of them, it catches them.
I do feel like almost everything, I feel like almost everything that is a virtue, like the opposite thing can in some case be a virtue. You know what I mean? Like there are like I like vivid writing in which, but there are writers who are masterful at making writing extremely, like a lot of Murakami is like,
is a little flat,
lulling you to sleep with this extreme flatness and blandness, which is very skillfully and intentionally deployed to create this kind of disassociative weirdness. But it's like, you know what I mean? Like, but it's a lot of,
Hemingway does that, right? Like Hemingway and even Salinger, right? There's this sort of post-war trauma that gets expressed in their characters through this flatness, right? And sometimes they'll contrast it with, like, here's the traumatized soldier returning who speaks very flatly, and then the animated wife or so on as a contrast. But sometimes all the characters kind of have that, and it I don't know, it gives you a sense of there's this tremendous weight and significance behind every very bland thing that they're saying, right? And it engages the reader in this game of kind of like trying to parse out, like, he's talking to a little girl about banana fish. Does that mean that and they're swimming in the ocean? And does that mean that he's about to sexually assault her? And no, he's about to go back and kill himself, in fact, is the next thing that happens, right? And it's, so it's, I don't know, I'm not sure what I'm saying, but it's a really interesting way
but I would say also to lower the tone a little bit, there are also people you read not for character and not for dialogue. You know, I mean, and some people are perfectly happy to read nothing. I mean, I'm not going to, a lot of bestsellers are like this. I don't understand how anybody can read them, because you're basically reading them for the plot. And people invent their own characters because there are no characters, and people think they've read this. He always says this. People think they've read these lively characters, and they haven't. They've invented them. But anyway, not everybody wants or cares about that. Some people care more about plot or cool ideas. In the science fiction world, certainly when I started reading, and even now, there's stories that are really great, and they have verbal dialogue characters, but they're great idea stories. So
when I was in school, I was required to write an essay in defense of why love story worked.
Movie,
For those of you just joining us,
no, the book.
The book.
Yes.
I'm not familiar. I think I know a song from Love Story, the movie. All I know in context.
That it was tremendously popular. It was a runaway bestseller, and it was all I could do to force myself to get through it.
And it's only about 20 pages long too. It's really short.
Well, it's but it was very interesting to take it apart and to try to figure out exactly why it was so popular, because I found it extremely dull. But it's very, the things that I found dull about it, which is that neither one of the loving pair was a real person, but was kind of an idealized, romanticized nothing, and they spoke exactly alike, and it was like a Barbie and a Ken doll in this book, and they were being put through their tragic paces, and the whole thing was satisfying. If they were set up so that you could imagine the person that you were attracted to was your perfect match,
kind of mapped onto the characters he was writing.
And he left you room to do that, I think, very deliberately.
It's funny what you said about, like, you imagine people think they've read the characters, but actually there are lacunae that the readers have filled. I mean, I think that in some ways that is, the reader is always doing half the work. And all the fiction, just like, and every fiction is, everything you write is balanced. There's balance between, familiarity and estrangement. Like, you're giving them some things to hang on to that are familiar, and then you're producing some things that are new, whether it's novel ways that the characters are acting or world building or whatever. Like, there's, like, humans want to be balanced between the familiar and the new. I mean, different levels for different humans at different times, but like, there's always a mix. And between, like, detailed and, like, the specified and the unspecified. If you're describing one thing richly and leaving another thing to be elided or to be filled in, like you were saying with the Hemingway motivations. And it's, Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics. Have you read that? That's a fascinating tome about comics as an art. And one thing he talks about is why, like, in Tintin, the villains are more realistically drawn, more detailed drawn, and the heroes, and this is true of a lot of fiction, the heroes are more sort of very simple, like just some dots and lines. It's a circle for the head and some dots for the eyes. And it's, his argument is because you project yourself more easily into that blankness. Like, you identify more because you feel like that you can put more of you in there because there's less defined. So the character, the villains are often sort of very, like, there's a lot of them there because it presses in on you, and the sympathetic characters are kind of like a little bit blank, so you can fill them, and that's it's interesting.
That's how genre fantasy works. Holy crap, that's brilliant.
But so why you read fiction has something to do with the kinds of characters that you're drawn to. Because, I mean, I know that for my sins, Dorothea Brooke mapped herself on me, and this was not actually a good life choice. But she was so herself, and I found her so attractive in I don't even remember why. I was very young. But I know that there's something that's got a very strong gravity from me in characters who are absolutely themselves.
Dorothea Brooke is from George Eliot's Middlemarch.
Yes.
Right.
I was like, I knew that name and I couldn't place
what. So Middlemarch.
I have to do a slight segue. I love the point about Tintin, but I think book designers sometimes take the wrong lesson from that. And I once did a project, I called it the Red Sari Project, that was looking at South Asian women's cover designs as opposed to men's cover designs, because I was super frustrated with what HarperCollins had given me for Bodies in Motion. And it was, they take the South Asian woman, they put her in a red sari, but it's a truncated torso, right? They cut off her head, and that was super common for women's fiction for quite a long time. And I don't know if they're still doing that, but the argument they made was, it makes it easier for the reader to project themselves into the character if there's no face on the cover. And I think also YA. Well, they were very sincere about it at the time, but I got suspicious, and I went and researched and looked at lots of South Asian American writers and found that they only did that to the women's books. The women's books, they took a figure and they gave this sexy torso, often cut off arms and legs, and just placed it on, like, filling most of the cover. And the men's books would have full people, sometimes faces, sometimes not, but often like full people walking through landscapes with cities and bridges, and here are the men doing important manly things, and this is a serious novel with a war in the background, right? And for the women's cover, it was like, here is a torso and maybe a piece of fruit or a flower. Literally. And I never published it. I put it up online at one point, and but it was very unnerving. And the sort of capper to it all was that once a woman had won an award, which had happened a couple of times, her covers changed and she started getting the men's covers. Wow. She had to earn her literary quality, right? And otherwise she was her book was an object to be for the male gaze, essentially, right? To bring a little bit of feminist speak into it. So anyway, pissed me off. Sorry, segue, but tangent.
But that's particularly, I think that last bit is particularly telling, because it's sort of otherwise the argument you could make is like, well, maybe they expect women's books to be more about interiority and men's books more about that. But like the fact that she wins an award, and now, because presumably the writing style didn't change to suddenly be focused less on interiority. So that's a pretty telling detail.
Yeah. Unnerving. So also they went from red to blue, which is just hilarious. The women's covers were all red, and then the men's covers were blue, and then you win an award and you get a blue cover. I mean, it's just funny.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm so sorry I was late, you guys. I am, for the readers, I'm actually in California. It's my first time traveling post-COVID. I'm in theory on a writing retreat, but I did a book launch party yesterday and cooked a ridiculous amount of food. And so I'm coming off a 3-day cooking binge, and my I made a lot of food, and I'm really great to be able to feed people again. But I had this moment of like, I got a text from Darius saying, "Are you joining us for the podcast?" And I was like, "Are we recording today? What day is it?" Time means nothing. So sorry about that. Can you fill me in when you guys started? Did you have a focus? What were you thinking about?
No.
You just
plunged in.
Well, okay, so I love all of the writing discussion, and now I'm like wondering whether Delia is available for freelance editing work, because she did such a brilliant job on Tamlin. And Delia, like, let us know, and we'll put a note in the show notes if you are.
We like talked about Ben's new novel and how I feel he should market it. So you didn't miss anything.
Excellent.
Well, that was before we started recording, actually. I don't think we have that on tape.
We've been talking for a very long time, and here in New York, it's lunchtime, and you talking about cooking is just slaying me. So I don't know.
I'm so sorry. So, well, I don't have to keep you too long. If we need to let you go, we can let you go. I do want to ask, at some point, I would love to talk to you guys more about the sort of history of the field and being, LGBT writers in genre, and things, what barriers there were, what you ran into, what you blithely sailed past by wit of your brilliance, etc. And so
I'm dying to talk about that stuff. And I feel like my whole generation was it happened at an extraordinary time in the development of the field, and nobody's asking us about it. It's cuckoo. So please do.
I think we should do a dedicated episode, honestly. And maybe if you could think a little about, would we want to do it like a panel? Is there one or two other people who you might want to pull in for that? That might be really fun and interesting. So
I would love that. Really.
I don't know. So, as a little baby queer, I'm not a baby queer anymore. Middle-aged queer.
Former baby queer.
I was, and it was so great having models to, not be making it all up from scratch. You guys made it up from scratch. So
no, we didn't, because we had people that we were behind too. I mean, if you could get
not really well,
no, if you could get Elizabeth Lynn, for instance, to join us or to talk about this sort of thing, because when I read her books, those were the ones that made me understand that it was possible to have a different kind of life than the one I was being offered.
Mm-hmm.
Not on a distant planet and not doing the thing, but that there could be a normality behind it, and I could have a life that was not going to be constantly judged by who I wanted to be with.
That's so interesting. Sometimes I feel like I've written and edited more than a dozen books at this point, but I've been keeping this blog on, my blog and on Facebook now since December 95. It is the third oldest blog on the internet, which is for whatever that's worth. But I sometimes think like that is actually my biggest writing project. And it's just me talking about my day, and it's not necessarily very crafted, but because it models, being a South Asian queer woman who is bi and poly and out, and look, my life is fine, and there's a way in which, that's maybe more valuable than anything else I write, because so many people have written to me and over the decades about like, I didn't know that you could do this and be okay, that you could, just even like the fact that I like kind of live this suburban mom lifestyle now with a house and, coaching my daughter's soccer team on occasion, is people sort of think you can't do that. You can't do both. Right. And so I don't know. It's interesting thinking about what models we put forward in our fiction as well as our lives that open up possibilities for other people. Delaney said that society will always push you to the most conservative position it can. I quote that a lot. And really? And I can't remember where it was he said it. It might be an epigram to one of his memoirs, but it's such a useful and true framing, I think.
I said really not. I mean, sure he said it, but what does it mean? What does that mean? And I don't know if I agree.
Oh,
I do. Well, I think it's I guess I think about it in terms of fear of the other and like the tribe coming out of the cave and sort of the impulses towards societal conformity. And if you step out of line, then we're going to whack you down because it's dangerous. In like a scarcity environment, right? To have outliers, or at least it seems like it's going to be dangerous, right? And then how we can, when people do create spaces for themselves, it's often, I'm thinking of like Shyam Salvatharai's Funny Boy, we referenced in this other episode with Sugi, actually, and it was the first Sri Lankan LGBT book I read. It's about a young gay boy growing up in Sri Lanka, and there's a brilliant scene where he's playing dress up with the other kids, and they're playing wedding, and it's called Bride, and he wants to be the bride, and so he plays it. He puts on the beautiful bride dress and the kids go along with it. But then like one of the other kids goes and reports it to the adults, and because she's mad that she wanted to be the bride and she didn't get to be. And the adults come down super hard on him, right? They are freaked out. And then it goes on to him navigating growing up as gay in Sri Lanka. And I read it when I was in college, and it was an opening up of possibility, right? It was this could be allowed. And the book is all about the way society keeps trying to shove you into the box. I don't know. I feel like a lot of my work is centered on that, about these boxes that we keep trying to put people into. So you can disagree, Ellen, or you can argue with me.
I needed it explained better in a contemporary context. I get it now. Yeah.
Okay.
But it does, God, it raises this whole autobiographical schema for me. I'm not sure I have the blood sugar to go into now.
When your guest tells you for the second time that you have to let her go so she can eat, we should maybe let her go. But
Julia, you were nodding a lot while she was saying that.
Well, the thing is that you get reinforced for the things that make you part of your culture, and you get negative reinforcement for the things that don't make you part of your culture. And some people deal with this by entering a subculture, which they then shut themselves off from the rest of the larger culture, because there is this thing,
God, you're right.
which is like a mass in a body that is self-contained. And there it is, and you're in the GLBT cyst, or you're in the very, very religious cyst of whatever kind of religion that you're interested in, or you're in something else, but where you are close to the norm. And what's really weird, which is what happened to me, is that yes, I am gay. I have pretty much always been bi, and I was living with a woman who was very deeply embedded in Boston in 1970 in lesbian separatist circles. And that was not who I was. They didn't like that I shaved my legs. They didn't like that I cared what my hair looked like. They didn't like that I would rather wear a skirt than pants. I wasn't trying to be cis. I wasn't trying to be normal in that way. I was trying to be me. But everything I did, they saw as a betrayal of some kind. And I had a really hard time. I had a worse time socially with the people that I was supposed to be out to than with the people I had to mask as in front of me.
Yeah.
And that's weird.
I think the subcultures often police themselves harder in a different way, right? As they've been there. There's a certain level of trauma that goes into the creation of that subculture, and then people get very protective of it. And so if you're seen as a threat, suddenly, like, are you really part of our group, or are you an outsder threatening us again? Right.
I understand that now, but when I was 25, I did not.
Yeah.
When I was 25, it was painful. Now I can look back and say, well, I can really see where they're coming from. And I've got some friends who were very much part of, like the lesbian Avengers and so on and so forth. And when I talk to them and read their stuff, I can really understand what it is that they're saying. But when you're 25, you don't have that.
Sure.
You don't have that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The autobiographical point I want to make is that, weirdly enough, and this may or may not speak to Ben, as a Jew, I was taught early on that we're different from other people. This was a big thing in my family, especially my mother. We're different. We don't do the things that, we don't believe the things that your friends do. We don't eat the food that your friends do because we're different, because we're Jews, and it's not bad or good. It's just we're different. And as a result, I think I was much more comfortable with the idea of being different all my life than I had any right to be.
That's fascinating.
No, I definitely relate to that. I mean, that there's a kind of that's a kind of there was never any possibility of being completely securely integrated into the norm. That's like, that's not even a thing. So
I want to layer that on top of that, and it's probably another conversation, but like the experience of traveling between countries and what happens. I was talking to some people at the party yesterday about who are all, I think it's called third culture kids.
Third culture kids.
Yeah, right. And
like my kids.
Yeah, and the way that, like, I often think, I came to the US when I was 2.5, and if my parents hadn't done that, if I'd stayed in Sri Lanka, odds are I would have had an arranged marriage somewhere in my early 20s and had kids and maybe had a very happy life with occasional like longing looks at women and never quite understanding what was going on there, and it's fascinating. It's sort of this the way in which travel and opened up a bunch of possibilities because I could no longer be embedded in Sri Lankan culture, and I was clearly not embedded in American culture, right? And so now you have to forge a new path. There are no other options. So, all right. At last,
I was going to say about the about the subcultures thing that's I'm put in mind of Julie Serrano's Whipping Girl, where she talks about, I don't know if have you read that?
It's on my list. I'm going to read it.
It's very interesting, and she talks about the idea of safe space, and the danger of the idea of safe space, because the promise of a sort of idealized homogeneity, now finally it's just us, and as soon as you do that, you find out that within the us there's more us's and thems to be had, and so it never ends. And so the idea that alliance is this much more durable model of safety, that it's we're different and now we're going to figure out how to support each other, that will work all the way down. Whereas now it's just us, we'll always have, and she's particularly, she's trans, she's particularly talking about, the kind of experience of trans people with, the queer community, and then within that, transphobia, and then within, and also I think femphobia. I mean, I think also that sort of part of what I hear in what you're talking about they don't want you to shave your legs, is that, that's something my kids react to when they see 1970s second wave feminism. Is it's so over, Free to Be You and Me is this hugely amazing, uplifting album. You remember, I grew up on it and I played it for my kids, and it's got so much beautiful thinking of this 70s egalitarian feminist vibe, and all the stuff about women asserting themselves, and also all the stuff about it's all right to cry for boys is just holds up really well. And then there's this one, Ladies First, where that's just terrible, where there's this one skit where there's this expedition to a jungle, and this lady eventually gets eaten by a crocodile whose crime is essentially being too femme, and too prissy or something. And it's just weirdly jarring. And I think that was a big part of a big confusion in 70s feminism, in a way. It's we need to there was so much resentment of having been made to perform femininity that femininity itself became the thing that was demonized, not the compulsoriness of it. And that there was a whole generation of people who were and now my kids looking on that today, who have much more of the model of some people are butch, some people are femme, some people are, you know what I mean? That's another, there's gender identity, and then there's gender expression, and then there's sexuality, and those are three, completely different things. And you could occupy any space within this, there's all these axes, right? Also,
I'll overlay race on this, just to say you can have a very similar conversation. Another book on my to read list is Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? I think the title is something like that. And it is another, and I've read a little bit of it, but it's another look at this kind of creating subcultures, and why do we do it, and what are the effects. So you're also making me think of The Problem of Susan in Narnia, but I'm not segueing anymore. So we should let our guests.
We're going to let Ellen eat.
We're going to maybe any final thoughts, anything you want to say that we didn't let you say this time, and we'll bring you back. I mean, we should just talk to you forever and never let you off the podcast.
Every time we get together, there's this huge powwow about, how can we schedule and what can we do? And oh my God, do we want to do this? And then and when? And then we do it. And I'm like, can we just do this every week?
No,
I learned so much from you.
We'll keep bringing you guys back. You'll be our recurring guest. So I'm totally on board with this. But final thoughts, things that you didn't get to say that Ben and I talked over you in the way we do. Although you're better at holding your own than some people.
You're better at holding your own, but the Zoom, sadly, I keep being bothered by the fact that your microphone cuts out whenever we talk. So we have to leave more room.
Yes.
Go on.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think because we rambled all over the place with the glee of, you know, children let free in a large field.
Well, here, I'll redirect you. I'll leave you with a final question. So I think my writing students will probably read this at some point, watch this at some point. I will assign it to them. And so do you have any, when you're teaching, any favorite bits of advice for baby writers?
Read the stuff aloud when you've read it. You know, if you cannot read a sentence aloud easily, there's probably something wrong with the sentence. And if you find yourself floundering in the middle of a paragraph, trying to figure out, you're stumbling and having a hard time reading a paragraph, probably there's something wrong with the logic behind it, so that you didn't really know what it was that you wanted to say, and it's a confusing paragraph. It also tells you something about whether or not you're writing prose that is readable. It doesn't have to be beautiful, it just has to flow. And the best way to do that is to read it aloud. So that's the advice that I give all my students, and I think about half of them take it, and I think I can tell which ones.
I always read before I send a story out to editors. My final step is to read the whole thing out loud, even for novels. It's, you know, sometimes I have to break it into chunks, but it's
currently writing a novel that's probably going to be about, you know, 500 pages long, and reading that one aloud is not going to be, well, it's going to be fun and it's going to be useful, but it certainly is going to take a while.
But I can tell you from experience that she does this. She does it with short stories, and I will know this is happening because I'll sort of wander down to her study, and the door will be partly open, and I'll hear this rumbling mutter. You know, it's not like she performs. You don't perform it. You just kind of, it's the world's longest prayer session. and I know to just get the hell out of there and let her do what she's doing. I have so much advice for students, and right now I can't think of any of it, but I did think of the thing I wanted to say that I didn't get to say, which is going back to our, you know, my Zoom Shakespeare group where we read, Delia's and where we read the entire canon in the past year, April to April. And actually we did think that, like Simchas Torah, we would just begin again. There were people who wanted to do that. We didn't do it. But anyway, immediately after that happened, I had a short story due for Uncanny Magazine. And thought, what the hell am I going to write? Oh shit, I completely forgot about this. And then I realized, if you don't write something based on the fact that you just read the entire canon aloud, you are a fool. So I wrote, I was lying in bed next to Delia and worrying about it, and a line came to my head, which is, he knows Marlowe is going to outlive him. And I jumped out of bed and raced down the hall and started writing this story about Shakespeare and Marlowe. And I got it in late, but it's making it into the into Uncanny Magazine for the July/August issue, and it's called Immortal Coil.
Immortal Coil. That's this July/August. So out now, out any time, any moment, coming up.
Looking forward to reading it. Always a delight. Okay, well, here's the business of the podcast. We got to finish up with, where can people find you on the web, social media, etc., and like point us to a book of yours you'd love them to go read.
I need a new website, so I'm not going, because mine is so old that it's, you know.
No, actually, yours doesn't suck. You got fixed at one point. I was telling her that it was a complete disaster and needed to be fixed, but it actually got fixed. So it's not too terrible. I mean, it needs some updating, but it's not embarrassing. So deliashrimp.com is the website.
Excellent.
And I'm on Facebook, and I'm theoretically on Twitter, but I never remember to check it.
Excellent. And if someone was going to go read something of yours right now, what would you want them to go read?
I think that in a way, I would like them to read The Porcelain Dove, which
I was going to say that. It's such a Delia book.
I am now writing adult novels. I wrote 5 middle grade novels, and I love them dearly, but I have completely run out of middle grade ideas. And I also have 5 books that I've had in my head for some time, and I really want to write them. Unfortunately, they're all big fat historicals, and I am probably going to have to live to be 102 to get through them all. But I'm working on a new one now.
The Porcelain Dove, you told them to go read it, but just give us the one line, so they know what they're going to go read.
The Porcelain Dove is a French fairy tale set in the 18th century, right around the French Revolution. And it's kind of about French fairy tale meets the French Revolution.
I just realized something. So your line about the kind of historical that you like to write has always been, I write about what happens right before the big event.
I write about what happens before the big event, and I tend to write, well, the book I'm writing now is about the people that history happens to. It's not about the people who make the history. And I think that could be, that's not the primary, it certainly is true of the Porcelain Dove, but that's not consciously what I'm writing about.
But what I'm saying is that you're having a certain amount of agony in the current book because you take them into the history.
Yeah.
Like the Porcelain Dove, you can see the French Revolution is coming, but it doesn't happen in the book. And in this, there actually is the siege of Paris. You make your people go through it. And then there is the horror of the Paris Commune, which was this attempt to, make Paris all very, progressive, which was they shot them down in the street. So you're hating having to do that, but you're doing it brilliantly, but you now have to change your tagline.
That's true.
I love how you are together. I want to recommend for the short story writers out there, I just finished reading Delia's collection, Young Woman in a Garden and Other Stories, and I loved it. It is the sort of thing where the way I read it is how I would recommend it to you. I read one story a night before bed for a couple weeks, and that was perfect. It was just, each one was like this little gem of a little, they are quite varied, but they have related sensibilities, I guess. And if you are into Shakespeare and fairies, there's a really delightful fairy story that I don't want to say more about because I am going to avoid spoilers with this. But I my favorite, I think, is the girl who lives alone on the shore and the ship that shows up and what happens with that. But I'm not going to say anymore. Okay, Ellen, you're.
What should people read of mine? So if I'm well known for anything, it's for the Swords Point interrelated massive family saga. And so as a result, I'm going to say read Thomas the Rhymer.
Go ahead.
It's the book I wrote right after Swords Point to show what an incredible range I have. And it's based on folklore, and it's romantic without ever being a romance. And the language is exquisite, partly because I was modeling it all on what I think of as ballad speak. There's a certain rhythm to the way ballads, this is Anglo-Scots mostly, ballads. It's got its own language, its own sensibility. And even though the story takes place half in Elfland and half on the Scottish border, I don't have people speaking in dialect, but the way I get the sense that you're in that place across is through the rhythms and the occasional use of words. And I want more people to know it and love it. And I'm thinking, possibly with the help of my beloved friend, Terry Windling, who I basically wrote that book for and who edited it, that she said, if you want to do another ballad book, I'll go. And it's funny because that's stuff I do, like breathing. It's almost like it's so easy for me that I don't do it. And I realizing nobody else does this. This is a gift that I've been given, and I should probably deploy it.
It's a delightful book. I loved it. It was part of the fairy tale series that Terry edited. No, it was a separate thing.
It wasn't. No.
Oh, interesting.
It looked like it was because it had the same cover artist.
Did it have a Thomas Canty cover? Yes. Okay, that's probably what confused me. That's funny. But I enjoyed it very much, and now I want to go into a whole separate thing about Thomas the Rhymer and Tam Lin, and they're not the same, right? And
thank you. We'll put you on sometime, and we'll.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, that would be great. So, all right.
I'm curious to know whether anyone has ever suggested this, but it seems like it ought to come full circle that then people should write ballads based on, like it having been drawn from ballads, people should then have really?
Somebody actually did.
Oh, wow.
In that that book has actually been responsible for a couple of marriages.
Really?
And I know the one couple who, like, they'd broken up and they had been reading the book to each other over the phone, and they read it again and decided to get married. And he
Wow.
his version of it that's based on the book. And if I could call up names right now, I would. And put it in the footnotes.
Excellent. Cool. All right. Thank you both so much. It's always a delight.
Yep.
I want to let you go, and I'm mad that I missed the first half, but I'll listen to it. So, all right.
Marianne, it's lovely to see both of you.
Yay. Okay.
We must do this sometime.
We will. Okay. So officially signing off.